A rainy day is as good a reason as any to cook brisket. But this one is not about fancy gear or an expensive prime packer. It starts with a budget select brisket from Walmart, the kind a lot of people pass over because they assume select means dry, tough, and disappointing. My name is Marcus, and this is old school Texas brisket the way I like to teach it. Simple seasoning, plenty of fat left on the meat, a little lard at the beginning, a real wood fire, and patience instead of tricks. The point of this method is not to bury the beef under rubs or injections. It is to take an affordable brisket and get as much tenderness, moisture, smoke, and beef flavor out of it as the cut will give you. That begins with one decision most modern brisket videos tell you not to make. I am not trimming the fat cap off. I want that fat there because it acts as a buffer during the cook. It renders over time, and anything I do not want on the finished slices can be trimmed afterward. In my family, that was normal. You cooked with the fat, let it do its work, and cut away what you did not want when the brisket was done. Before we season it, rub a thin coat of room temperature lard over the meat. The lard spreads much easier when it is soft, and I want it over both sides. It helps the seasoning cling, it starts building color, and on a leaner select brisket, it gives the surface a little extra richness before the rendering really gets going. Before the fire ever gets lit, that choice already separates this cook from the modern competition style. We are not sculpting a brisket for judges. We are cooking affordable beef for people who want supper. If old school butcher methods like this are useful to you, subscribe now because I want to keep showing you how to get more out of affordable cuts without turning barbecue into a chemistry experiment. The goal here is simple. Understand the meat, control the fire, and make the process repeatable enough that you can do it in your own backyard without guessing at every step. Once the lard is on, the seasoning stays basic. Kosher salt goes first. Regular household salt can work if that is what you have, but do not bury the brisket in it. I still want to taste beef when this is finished. After the salt comes a generous coat of coarse black pepper. Pepper is the star of a Texas-style brisket, and on a big piece of beef, you can use more than you think because a lot of that exterior fat is going to render, and the seasoning will be spread across every slice. Then add onion powder. That is it. Salt, black pepper, onion powder, no complicated blend, no heavy sugar, no dozen spice rub. Season one side, turn the brisket, season the other side, and do not massage the rub into the surface. Let it sit where it lands. Then pick up the seasoning that fell into the pan and use it along the sides so nothing goes to waste. While the brisket rests, build the fire. The cooker in the original method is a barrel-style charcoal cooker, but the principle is more important than the brand. Charcoal gives you a steady base of heat, and a small amount of real wood gives you the smoke. You do not need a cord of wood for this. A few dry chunks are enough. Cherry wood was used here, and that works beautifully with beef because it brings smoke without overwhelming the meat. If you do not have access to split firewood, bagged hardwood chunks from a home improvement store will do the job. The key is dry, clean wood and a fire that burns clean instead of smoldering dirty smoke over the brisket. Set the charcoal up with a starter in the middle so the fire can establish itself gradually. Once the coals are burning well, put the lid on and stabilize the cooker before the meat goes anywhere near it. This step matters more than people think. A roaring fire and a cold brisket are a bad combination because the fat can begin dripping hard before the cooker settles, and that can make the fire flare while the outside of the meat cooks too fast. Give the cooker about 5 minutes with the lid on after ignition and let it settle into the high 200s, around 290 to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. That is hotter than the low and slow temperature many people associate with brisket. But this method is built around a shorter Texas-style cook and a fatty select packer that benefits from strong rendering. Once the fire is steady, the brisket goes on fat side down. I am repeating that because it goes against what many smokers are taught. Fat side down. In this cooker, the heat is coming from below, so the fat cap acts as a shield between the fire and the leaner meat. As it renders, drippings fall toward the coals, and that adds another layer of aroma inside the cooker. This is also why I'm not trimming all the fat off at the beginning, only to turn around and add rendered tallow later. My preference is to leave the brisket's own fat on the brisket and let it do the job naturally. Is that the only way to cook brisket? No. Barbecue has more than one correct road, but this is the old school Texas road we are following today. Once the brisket is on, close the cooker and stop opening the lid every 10 minutes. The fire needs stability more than the meat needs attention. The plan is roughly a 6-hour cook before the rest, But brisket does not read a clock, and later I will show you exactly why that matters. For the first hour, leave it alone. Around the 1 hour to 1.5 hour mark, we are going to mop it. Then around hour 3, we will flip it and mop it again. After that, it cooks untouched for roughly 2 more hours before wrapping near hour 5. The final wrap stage is where the timing can change the most because some briskets push through quickly and some stall. The mop sauce is as old school as the seasoning. You need 3 lemons, crushed red pepper, water, apple cider vinegar, and a small amount of lard. Start by slicing the lemons and squeezing them into a container. Do not worry about making it pretty. Then mix equal parts water and apple cider vinegar, basically a 50-50 blend. Add just a little lard. The lard helps the mop cling to the meat instead of running straight off. Then add about a handful of crushed red pepper. Do not assume that handful is there to make the brisket painfully hot. The coarse black pepper in the rub is doing more of the heat work. The red pepper in the mop is mostly there for another layer of flavor. Warm the mop before you use it. You can keep it on the stove or set the container somewhere warm on the cooker. What you do not want is a refrigerator cold liquid being poured over hot meat because every cold mop steals heat from the surface and can slow the cooker down. Warm, not boiling, is what you need. At around an hour to an hour and a half, open the cooker, work quickly, and mop the exposed surface. Do not drown it. Too much liquid can run into the fire and knock the coals down. A light coating is enough, then give the fire a few seconds to recover before you put the lid back on. This matters especially with a sealed barrel cooker because opening the lid feeds oxygen to the coals and can make the fire surge. You want the cooker breathing, not roaring. Close it back up and let the brisket keep rendering. Around hour 3, open it again. By this point, the brisket should already look smaller than it did at the beginning because fat has rendered and moisture has moved. Flip the brisket, mop it again, and return the lid. Some cooks like to leave a piece of lemon on the surface for moisture and aroma, and that is optional. The more important thing is that you do not keep spraying and mopping every few minutes. After this second mop, leave it alone for about 2 hours. That long, uninterrupted stretch helps the exterior set. The fat continue rendering, and the meat keep taking on clean smoke. This is where discipline beats fiddling. Every time you open the cooker, you change the fire. Every time you dump liquid on the meat, you cool the surface. The brisket does not need constant rescue. It needs steady heat. And while it cooks, remember the main reason this old method works with a cheaper select brisket. We are using the brisket's own fat as a buffer instead of trimming it aggressively at the beginning. That approach sacrifices some of the perfectly sculpted bark people chase online, but I would rather have a juicy slice of brisket with enough bark than a gorgeous black shell around dry meat. Bark matters, but it is not the whole meal. Around the 5th hour, start preparing for the wrap. This is the point where the cook changes from building smoke and exterior color to pushing the brisket through the final tenderizing stage. For the wrap, have aluminum foil ready before you open the cooker. Butcher paper is popular in Texas barbecue, and it can make excellent brisket, but this old school method uses foil because foil traps rendered juices instead of letting them soak away. That becomes important when we rest and slice the meat. I want those drippings. They are concentrated beef, smoke, seasoning, and rendered fat, and throwing them away makes no sense to me. The trade-off is that foil softens the bark more than paper, but again, I am choosing moisture and eating quality over winning a bark beauty contest. If you are arguing with me about foil versus butcher paper, tell me which one you use and why. Barbecue people can debate that subject longer than the brisket takes to cook. Just remember what this method is trying to accomplish. We started with a cheaper select brisket, left the protective fat in place, used lard instead of an injection, seasoned it simply, ran a controlled fire, and mopped only twice. At the wrap, we are going to trap what the brisket has produced and finish by feel, rather than pretending the clock can make the decision for us. At about hour 5, open the cooker and get ready to wrap. The brisket is hot. The cooker is going to breathe harder the moment the lid comes off, and that sudden oxygen can wake the fire up fast. So work with purpose. Lay out enough aluminum foil to wrap the brisket tightly. I like foil for this old school Texas method because it catches the rendered juices and keeps them with the meat. Butcher paper has its place, especially if your priority is preserving a firmer bark, but foil gives me something I want later. Every drop I can save. Set the brisket on the foil and wrap it tightly, folding the corners in so you squeeze out unnecessary air pockets. You are not making a loose tent. You want a snug package. In the original cook, the brisket was returned to the cooker with the orientation adjusted according to where the heavier fat felt like it was sitting. Now, that is a useful reminder that briskets are not identical objects. One can carry more fat on one side, another can be thicker through the point, and after years of cooking, you start using your hands as much as your eyes. The rule is not to worship one orientation after the wrap. The rule is to protect the leaner parts from the strongest heat and use the fat as your shield whenever possible. Once the wrapped brisket goes back in, put the lid on and let the fire settle again. The initial plan called for roughly 1 more hour after wrapping, which would bring the total cooking time to around 6 hours. But this is where the brisket reminded everyone why barbecue schedules are dangerous. It stalled. Instead of becoming tender on the planned timetable, this piece needed roughly 2 additional hours after the wrap. That is one of the most valuable lessons in the entire cook. A recipe can give you a schedule, but the brisket gets the final vote. Weather changes things. Cooker temperature changes things. Thickness changes things. Fat content changes things. Even 2 briskets from the same case can finish at different times. So after the wrap, stop asking only, how long has it been? Start asking, how does it feel? Probe the thickest sections through the foil. You are looking for the probe to enter with very little resistance. People often describe it as sliding into soft butter. The original brisket was finally pulled at an internal temperature of about 198 degrees Fahrenheit because that was where it had become tender enough. Do not turn 198 into a magic number. It is the number that matched this brisket. Another one may feel ready slightly earlier or slightly later. Temperature tells you where to start paying close attention. Tenderness tells you when you are done. This is especially important with the point and the flat because they are 2 different muscles joined in one brisket. The flat is leaner and thinner. The point is thicker, fattier, and more forgiving. If you chase a number without paying attention to both sections, you can end up with a point that feels wonderful and a flat that has already gone too far. Use the thermometer as a tool, not as the boss. Once the brisket comes off, do not cut it. And I know that smell makes patience difficult, but cutting now is one of the easiest ways to waste the work you just did. The brisket needs a long rest. In this cook, it rested for roughly 2.5 hours in a warm, holding environment around 150 degrees Fahrenheit. A low oven or another cooker capable of holding that gentle temperature can do the job. Keep the brisket wrapped and set it in a metal pan or tray so every drop that escapes stays with you. That warm hold lets the internal temperature come down gradually, lets the rendered fat settle, and gives the meat time to relax before slicing. If you cut a blazing hot brisket straight off the pit, the juices rush out onto the board, and the slices can fall apart or dry faster than they should. The rest is not dead time, it is part of the cook. How long do you usually rest your brisket? An hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, or do you struggle to wait at all? Tell me in the comments because this is one of the places where backyard cooks change their results without changing a single ingredient. When the rest is over, open the foil carefully. There should be a pool of rendered juices inside, and I save them. This is another reason I chose foil over paper for this specific method. Paper breathes and lets more of those drippings escape. Foil captures them, pour or spoon the juices into the pan instead of letting them run onto the cutting board. You can use them to keep slices moist. Spoon a little back over the meat, or simply let the cut brisket sit against those drippings while you serve it. Nothing in that liquid needs to be wasted. It is concentrated brisket flavor. Now look at the finished meat before you cut. A properly cooked brisket should have some jiggle to it. The point especially should feel loose rather than rigid. The bark should be dark and set, although because we used foil, it may be softer than the dry bark you get from an unwrapped cook or butcher paper. Remember the choice we made at the beginning. This method prioritizes moisture and tenderness over creating the hardest possible exterior crust. When the brisket is sliced, I care much more about whether the meat is juicy and tender than whether somebody can knock on the bark like a door. Start by identifying the grain. This matters because brisket fibers are long, and slicing with them makes a tender brisket chew tougher than it needs to. The flat has a fairly obvious grain direction. Turn the brisket so your knife crosses those fibers, then slice against the grain. The point becomes more complicated because its grain runs differently from the flat. As you move into that thicker section, pay attention and change the direction of your knife when the fibers change. Do not keep cutting the entire packer in one direction just because that is how you started. The meat tells you where the grain is going. I like to trim off a small end piece first so I can see the structure clearly, then work into clean slices. The flat should hold together when you lift a slice but pull apart with gentle pressure. That balances what you're after. If the slice crumbles before you touch it, the meat may have gone too far. If you can tug on it hard and it refuses to separate, it probably needed more time. The point will be fattier, softer, and richer. When you squeeze or bend a good piece, you should see moisture and rendered fat without needing to pour external tallow over it. Just for the camera, that was another point of the original method. The brisket already carried its own fat. We left that fat in place, allowed it to render, and saved the juices in the foil. There is no need to manufacture a glossy appearance by pouring rendered beef fat over every slice afterward if the meat is already moist. Tallow can absolutely be useful in other methods, but here the philosophy is simpler. Why trim away your fat only to cook it separately and add it back later? Keep the natural buffer, let the brisket render in the cooker, and decide what exterior fat you do not want after the cook. That is the old school logic behind this recipe. It also explains why the starting grade matters less than people think when the technique is right. This was a select brisket, not a high dollar prime brisket. Select generally gives you less marbling to work with, so you have less forgiveness inside the lean flat. Instead of pretending that difference does not matter, the method compensates for it. Leave the fat cap. Add the thin layer of lard before seasoning. Manage the fire. Mop lightly rather than constantly. Wrap when the exterior has taken enough smoke and color. Save the rendered juices. Rest for a long time. Every one of those steps is trying to protect moisture in a piece of meat that does not have premium intramuscular fat doing all the work for you. That is why I like teaching brisket with an affordable piece. If you learn to make a select packer juicy and tender, buying a better marbled brisket later feels like somebody gave you extra room for error. But technique still matters. A prime brisket can be ruined by bad fire management just as easily as cheap meat can be improved by patient cooking. Let us go back through the whole Texas-style method once, because the sequence is what makes it repeatable. Start with the brisket and leave the fat largely intact. Rub both sides lightly with room temperature lard. Season with salt, a healthy amount of coarse black pepper, and onion powder. Do not rub the seasoning into paste. Let it sit naturally on the surface. Build a charcoal fire with a few chunks of clean dry wood for cherry in this cook, and stabilize the cooker around 290 to 300 degrees Fahrenheit before loading the brisket. Put the brisket on fat side down when the strongest heat comes from below. Close the lid and resist the urge to keep checking it. Around the first hour to hour and a half, apply a light warm mop made from 3 lemons, equal parts water and apple cider vinegar, a little lard, and about a handful of crushed red pepper. Do not soak the meat or drown the fire. Close the cooker and keep the heat steady. Around hour 3, flip the brisket and mop it a second time, then leave it alone for roughly 2 more hours. Near hour 5, wrap it tightly in aluminum foil. Return it to the cooker and begin checking tenderness after about another hour, but expect the brisket to change your schedule. This one did. Instead of finishing at 6 hours, it stalled and required roughly 2 more hours wrapped before the probe felt right. It was pulled at about 198 degrees Fahrenheit. Then it went into a warm hold around 150 degrees for about 2.5 hours. Only after that rest was it opened, the juices saved, and the meat sliced against the grain. That is the recipe in plain English, but there are several details inside that list that make the difference.